Okay. This is in continuation of our work for English 211, English Literature, Part 1. Today we'd like to try to wrap up all the major themes seen so far for the course, both in terms of looking back to Beowulf and looking forward, of course, to Gawain and even to Shakespeare. Yes? Okay. And if I wanted to stop, I can press pause. Okay, can we continue then, folks? First, you will find this lecture on the blog address at www.grace.rssgt.com. Yes? Thank you. So that's www.grace. I think some of these techno-genius people in my class will help me if I have a problem. Thank you very much. Okay. Are we together then, folks? www.grace.rssgt.com. Okay. And on that blog, do I put oldies but goodies in terms of handouts for critical thinking, writing critically, etc.? So it's worth visiting it. And of course can save us some photocopying paper. Yes? I can't hear you. Is that the one I was using all along? Yes, I think it's the latest version, so check it out, please. Okay. Can we continue? First, do we wish to be aware of some of the timeless issues in terms of ethics, morals, or virtues that are relevant to both the images and portrayals of Beowulf in the movie, yes, and of course to Gawain in both the movie version that we saw and the book version, any version. Do we wish to go back, understandably enough, to the Greek versions of virtue? If we're looking at the work and constantly asking the question about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, why are we paying so much attention to something that was written somewhere in the 1400s in Middle English? In other words, why has this book been published and reprinted, translated and retranslated so many times? Obviously, because it must have some timeless significance in terms of its content, its messages, its major themes, but also it must have some timeless significance in terms of its structures, how these were conveyed to readers. But will it also have a context, yes, an ethical or philosophical context into which it fits neatly and also timelessly? Can we think in terms first then of the Greek virtues? Yes? You've heard the expression, the Greeks had a word for that, yes? And been aware, those of us who have studied linguistics and roots of language, that of course what? The Greek people were always trying to find a definition for everything and an explanation for everything. And it doesn't surprise us then that Greek and Roman mythology today still are the roots of many of our efforts to explain some of the puzzling aspects of human nature. For instance, we say that Sigmund Freud, F-R-E-U-D, was the great-great-great-grandfather of modern psychology. Yes? And one of Freud's, supposedly major discoveries was, of course, what we call today the Oedipal complex, O-E-U-D-I, or Oedipus complex, and the Electra complex. But if you go back in time to see where these were rooted, Oedipus complex is the idea that most men have their strongest relationships and bonds with their mother, and that most women similarly have their strongest relationships and bonds with their father. These refer to King Oedipus, yes, who in mythology, of course, was the man who, without knowing it, married his mother. How did that happen? The play, and had children with her. The play shows it, of course, because Oedipus, in the play Oedipus Rex, Oedipus the king, R-E-X, yes, had in fact been abandoned by his original parents and had been found as a baby by people from another area, yes, or another city, and they took him as their own, and he grew up with them, and of course them loved him, and eventually he became their king and married one of the women of that city. But what he didn't know was that she was actually his mother. Is it still recording, my friend? Please.
Yeah.
It is. Thank you. Okay. So what happens then when Oedipus Rex discovers that he has had children with his wife? He, in the original play from Greek culture, he blinds himself. He gouges out his own eyes in this terrible symbolic act that says, I don't want to see what I have done or who I am. But of course, Freud takes the Oedipus complex as an example, for instance, of how many men find their closest relationships with mother. And of course, the mother bond has been criticized, of course, throughout the Caribbean. Yes? And what are we looking at when we look at the mother-son bond? It's something that, of course, can be very positive or very negative. The Electra complex, the same. Electra was the woman who was very close to her father. Now, we hear more and more and more about the Oedipus complex, but is that just an example, for instance, of how modern Western culture borrows from Greek or Roman mythology? Exactly. So, though Freud seems to have been the great discoverer of this bond between man and mother, actually he wasn't not the first. Okay, now mythology generally, many anthropologists will tell us that mythology generally often offers us ways to define and explain the otherwise inexplicable, the otherwise puzzling. In other words, that each culture creates its own mythologies, its own legends, its own stories to explain the unexplainable. Is it that the Eskimo people are said to have created stories about conflicts and quarrels between the sun and the moon to explain the midnight sun up in the North Pole? Yes? Okay. In other words, the reality that they have is it 6 months of sunlight and 6 months of darkness, and so on. So if you want to explain that, say that the sun and the moon had a fight, and they decided they could not coexist in the sky at the same time, and they didn't have a good divorce lawyer to help them make a resolution, or they were like the Republicans and the Democrats right now, for those of us who've been watching the news. But generally speaking, is it true that mythology can give us answers to aspects of life that are puzzling? But similarly also, if we agree that the Greeks had a word for everything, yes, did the Greeks have some versions of virtue? The things that should be desired, so to speak, the rules that we should live by, did they have their own definitions of these? Yes, of course they did. They had a word for everything. Okay, and are these called the Greek virtues? in quotation marks. Yes? First we have fortitude, which is not just physical strength. It's also what? Emotional, psychological, spiritual strength. Yes? It's defined as what? Fortitude is the capacity, in other words, to face up to and cope positively with even the greatest vicissitudes and misfortunes and tests that life can offer us. Does this immediately ring a bell? Fortitude, Fortitude. Now, it's physical, emotional, psychological, and even spiritual strength. Yes? The poem we got today from the 1900s, Rudyard Kipling, talks to us about what we might call another version of fortitude. Though is this one of the most quoted poems from the 1900s in English literature. Now, Kipling himself was a Nobel Prize winner, and he was a poet laureate for England. What date did we put on it, Miss Diane? 1926 or some such time. Kipling. Now, this poem called If is, of course, your typical, the poem If is your typical graduation poem. Yes? Used in boys' schools, of course, grammar schools. It's from 1865, IF. Now, he speaks about what it takes to be a true man. Have we heard this song before? Yes. Exactly. And he says what? When he talks about what we call tenacity, what the Greeks call fortitude, look at verse 3. You've all got a copy of this on your desk. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can do this, the last line is the climax of the poem. Then you will be a man, my son. Yes? And of course, are we thinking in terms of versions of tenacity, what the British call tenacity, Tenacity, what the Americans call guts? And we know they're not talking about our tummies, right? Tenacity is another word for fortitude. Is this what Kipling was talking about when he says, if you can force nerve and sinew to hold their turn long after the physical strength is gone, and there is nothing left in you except the will which says to you, hold on. Are we thinking, how many of us remember Michael Jordan in one of his really big games? Yes? When he was recovering from the flu? Yeah. And his father had just been killed? And he won the game within the last few seconds as usual. And he actually collapsed. Yes? Pippin had to hold him up. Is that an example of this kind of strength? It's not just physical. Is this Gawain going through that terrible journey? When in actual fact, the Americans would say, hang in there. Yes? People he met along the way when he was looking for the Green Knight's castle told him the castle might be that way, but you should go back that way. Yes? In other words, did it take guts, the strength of the diamonds that Gawain wears in his helmet and elsewhere? Does it take that kind of strength for Gawain to continue with the journey? You were looking at page 71 in the Burton Raffel version, and in your hardcover version, the Simon Armitage version, are we looking at the stage in the journey, yes? When he has to pray to the Virgin Mary. And because he is what? He's really on his last legs, isn't he? Yes? And he has no more physical resources. Is it at this point then that we see Gawain's spiritual tenacity as well? He's not giving up. Okay, now are we looking at page, for this version of the Armitage version, the end of Gawain's journey? Yes? What page are we looking at there? Okay, well, you can find it.
Page 25 in this one is when he said.
Page 25 in the green and white
Our
one.
Lady to tell him.
Page,
Right.
okay, that's the green and white one that you got from
Each you have the number on the side.
the hardcover one.
Yeah, line, well, it's
Uh-huh.
line.
We're line 736.
Yeah,
736.
36.
When he prayed to Mary to end his grief, to guide his weary steps to relief. Before that, line 709, Gawain's path wound through dreary scenes, etc., etc. He climbed over cliffs in many strange lands, nowhere near home, friendless now. Yes? And then on the next page, line 725 to 726, he could have died a dozen times over. Yes? Is it clear, in other words, that Gawain needs every nerve and sinew and more to survive this journey? But is the journey a metaphor or an analogy for life? Have we found that in our books?
Line 725.
Yeah, we're looking at line 735 to 36. When he prayed to Mary to end his grief, to guide his weary steps to relief. Have we found that in all different books? Yes or no? Okay. Now, if we read it, it should have rung a bell and we should have finished reading this by now. Okay. Now, are we looking at the concept of life then as this test? It's a journey, but the journey doesn't just test us physically, it tests us mentally and spiritually as well. He could have died 1,000 times over. Yes? Is it still working? But in actual fact, does he give up? No. So the Greek version of fortitude or tenacity, yes, the capacity to face and conquer tests that are not just physical. Are we looking at courage, which of course is related to honor, which is the absolute foundational knightly and manly virtue, keeping his word. In other words, he will not give up on this journey because in actual fact, he must keep his word to be a true man. Okay. Then of course, it's true that, not surprisingly, the many definitions of fortitude show us a picture of a woman with a baby in one hand and a huge shield in the other. The shield is a symbol of what? Protection, yes, against all odds, and of course, the need to survive and protect the innocent. Is Gawain's journey, in a sense, rooted in the need to protect the reputation of King Arthur's court, the first democracy, the Round Table? Yes. In other words, the Green Man has said, oh, you are just a bunch of beardless boys. Exactly. And Arthur has said, I will take this challenge. And Gawain has said, maybe to prove himself a little bit, but also what? Out of humility, a loss of me in the court would not be so important as a loss of you, the king. Yes. Okay. So the first of the Greek virtues then was fortitude. The next one was, of course, temperance. The next one was, of course, justice. Yes? And what is the last one? Let's have a look at temperance. What exactly is temperance? They call this the capacity to do what? To control all unruly passions.
Composure.
Yes, to maintain one's composure and one's self-control. Exactly. Some books will tell you the control of all unruly passions. Yes. Now, is temperance exactly what Gawain needed in the face of the onslaught from the lady? Yes, of course. And is temperance then somehow related to cleanliness? Exactly. Which was not just spiritual or sexual or physical cleanliness. Are we looking at what? Sexual self-control. Yes? Then, of course, justice, that explains itself. And then, of course, prudence. The capacity, to make wise decisions, even in uncompromising, even in who knows where it is, in uncompromising conditions. Prudence, the capacity to make wise decisions, even in uncompromising, confusing, difficult circumstances. Is this again what is demanded of Gawain if he is to survive? Prudence. Is it prudence that saves Gawain's life? Of course. A combination of prudence and what? Cleverness. In other words, we are looking at the capacity to make a wise decision. Do not have sex with this beautiful woman, however charming and tempting she may be. Yes? In other words, I'm sorry, folks. Yeah. In other words, does it take prudence? Does it also take temperance, self-control? And does it also take cleverness? Yes or no? Are we seeing how the Greek virtues overlap with the knightly virtues? My question is, are these virtues as relevant today as they were whenever the story was written?
Yes.
Of course. Yes. Does that explain why it's been republished so many times? Okay, but do we have to recognize then that part of the dualism of the roots and foundations of the story was, of course, what? The combination of Christian and non-Christian inheritances. Yes, sir?
What's your definition of prudence?
Prudence, the capacity to make wise decisions, even in most troubling and confusing circumstances. Yes? Okay. The lady has been troubling and confusing for sure. At best. At least. Yes? Okay. Question then. Are we looking also, if we go back to the roots of the story and the roots of Beowulf as well, did we always see the combination of non-Christian and Christian inheritances? Yes or no? Yes. Yes. And is it logical then that we should look to the Christian Bible and the Christian tradition for their version of the classic virtues that we need to see us through a lifetime of tests at best? Are we looking at faith, hope, charity? Exactly. Faith, hope, and charity. And we know from Corinthians that charity is the core virtue. Now, does charity work along with the manly or knightly virtue called magnanimity or generosity? Yes? Some textbooks call it the magnanimity, the generosity of spirit, that is the duty of the privileged towards those less privileged. Yes? This is what the original Burton Raphael book talks about as magnanimity. Yes? Okay. And of course, does charity cover a number of challenges? Yes or no?
Yes.
But do we see the dual, what you, my friend, Mr. Called the double, that you have a number of dualisms even at the end? Because does the non-Christian, the representative of the non-Christian culture, the monstrous Green Knight, yes, does he demonstrate the Christian virtue of charity towards Gawain? Could he have cut off Gawain's head there and then and gone home with it laughing? Yes or no? Yes. But he spares him. Not only does he spare him, does he teach Gawain and us as readers, if we wish to learn, an important life lesson. The life lesson of forgiveness from others, the importance of compassion, and of course, the need to forgive ourselves. To take responsibility for our wrongdoings, yes, but also to forgive ourselves. Is this a classic example of generosity of spirit, of charity? Yes. And does the monster transform himself into the mentor or the teacher at this emotional climax of the work? Of course he does. Does he tell Gawain very clearly in the denouement, what the French call the denouement, or the unraveling of the plot, which is, of course, what some critics call the final confrontation? It's the final confrontation in terms of a physical battle. But is this where Gawain will come face to face with the reality that he's been dealing with without knowing he's been dealing with it all the time? And we as readers also come clearly face to face with that reality. Does the writer then, the Gawain poet, put in the word in the mouth of the Green Knight? Sir Berkelac, the Green Knight, it doesn't matter, they're really the same frightening person. Yes? If you want to call them a person or a monster. Does he put in that man's mouth the important messages about charity, forgiveness, compassion, and self-forgiveness? Yes? Gawain, of course, expresses another core virtue of Christianity, and this is what? Humility. He has the humility to take responsibility for his own actions. Yes? And even when the Green Knight offers him the green scarf and says, keep it, you've basically earned it. Yes? Gawain says, I will not wear this scarf in pride. I will wear it as I wear the scar on my neck. Yes? Because the Green Knight has tried to just scare him out of his skin, make him jump out of his own skin. He has nicked him on the neck. Yes? But he could have cut off his head, of course. So is this a form of mercy? Even though it comes after the Green Knight plays this little game with him of fainting, pretending to be going to hit him and cut off his head twice before. So are we looking at the denouement, the unraveling of the plot? D-E-N-O-U-E-M-E-N-T. This is from the French, literally meaning what? Unraveling. You have a knot. Okay, you have a sweater, and one thread is loose, and you make the mistake of pulling that thread. And before you know it, half of the sweater is unraveled. Yes? So the unraveling means the taking it apart. Yes. Do we then as readers find some of our suspicions have been clarified? If we did not trust Sir Berkeley, and we had no reason to trust the Green Knight when we met him in King Arthur's court, if we did not trust Sir Berkeley, we wondered, why is this character being so nice to Gawain? And why does Sir Berkeley set up this agreement with Gawain? There will be 3 days of the hunt, and we will exchange whatever we won during these 3 days. The question is, Gawain is not going on a hunt. So what is he to exchange? I mean, those of us readers who have a legal mind, yes, or who have been in the police force or who have friends in the police force, might have questioned, why this agreement? Yes?
He was very naive.
Yes, but the naivete of Gawain and his vulnerability make him not question. But we are the flies on the wall observing this scene, yes? And we are engaged, as Jean-Paul Sartre puts it, we've engaged ourselves with the book. It's no longer just a collection of pages with black marks on them. Exactly. And we might have said to ourselves, what game is this man playing? He's been very charming and kind and compassionate to Gawain. He has put the service of his entire castle at Gawain's to fill Gawain's needs. He has put his beautiful wife to look after Gawain and nurture him back to health. Is this too good to be true? And of course, by the denouement, do we realize then that yes, it was too good to be true? And that Sir Berkeley, the wonderful, charming, compassionate, caring, gracious host, is also the horrific green man, the horrific Green Knight. Exactly. So if we're looking at the denouement, then, folks, do we get a reinforcement of the virtue called charity, the Christian virtue called charity, which is, of course, linked to the knightly virtue called generosity? Is it also linked to the Greek virtue called justice? In other words, and maybe even prudence. In other words, does charity, along with justice, guarantee that we will do the best we can for all our fellow men and fellow women, obviously? And what is it that Shakespeare tells us in The Merchant of Venice, one of his timeless plays, The Merchant of Venice? He says what? The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven. It is twice blessed. In other words, it blesses the giver and the taker. And of course, is mercy yet another version of charity? And is mercy often the thing that makes justice more meaningful? Knowing when to punish as the judge and jury, and knowing when to forgive. Is mercy that temperate quality? Now, of course, does the Green Knight at the denouement, the climax of the work, show us exactly the meaning of mercy and justice? The truth is, had he cut off Gawain's head there and then, we would have had little to argue about, other than the fact that from the beginning he lied. He did not represent himself fully to Gawain. In other words, it's after he makes the agreement with Gawain and Gawain falls for the trap, yes, that he picks up his head and says, oh, you now have to keep your word. Yes, exactly. We see him as a trickster, a manipulator. Yes? But by the end of the work, does he win back our respect or approval as a character. Yes? Okay. What is it that he tells Gawain? You are like a pearl to a pea compared to other knights. Yes? In other words, if you look at page 181 in the hardcover book, yes? Page 181, the top of page 181, yes? Mm-hmm. He says, I declare you purged, cleansed. It's 5 lines from the top of page 181, the hardcover one. As polished and as pure as the day you were born. In other words, don't feel that you should have anything on your conscience. Yes? Is he the forgiver, the one who shows us the meaning of charity? Yes? That was page 181. Page 179, 6 lines from the top, 7 lines from the top. And if we get these quotations coming back to us in sometime, will I be simply putting them, as I've said before, in modern English, a translation that will cover all the texts? So whichever text you're using, would you be at a disadvantage? No, not if you've actually read the book and digested it, which we should have done by now. Yes? Okay. What is it the green man tells him? He tells him the whole story. Because the belt you are bound with belongs to me. It was woven by my wife, so I know it very well. And I know of your courtesies and conduct and kisses and the wooing of my wife, for it was all my work. I sent her to test you, and in truth it turns out you're by far the most faultless fellow on earth. As a pearl is more prized than a pea which is white, so by God is Gawain among gallant knights. But a little thing more. It was loyalty that you lacked. And because you're wicked, not because you're wicked or a womanizer, not because you were driven by greed for this multi-million-dollar rock that she offered you, or by lust, you weren't a womanizer or worse, but you loved your own life. Ye loofed your liefer. The last I you blame, so I blame you less. Now, as we've said before, if one of our interpretations of the color green in the Green Knight's appearance is that he represents the life force-driven figure, the spirit of Mother Nature, which is green and constantly, renewing herself, yes? If that is so, then it's logical that the Green Knight should tell Gawain, you loved your life, and I can't hold that against you. Because he himself represents the spirit of life and renewal. Remember, we saw this in the movie as well, when they showed this green man as what? Some kind of fertility god. Okay. Now, do we notice then that the Green Knight is at this point teaching a doctrine of charity, of temperance, yes, of compassion and mercy, generosity, magnanimity, yes, and of course what? A doctrine that says, forgive yourself and move on with your life. You don't have to be bound to the past by guilt. You can learn from the past and move on. And does Gawain then wisely and humbly accept this teaching? But where the Green Knight offers him the scarf, and where it will be seen by all the members of Arthur's court as what? a sign of glory, what is it that Gawain says? I will keep it as a mark of my moment of weakness. Like the scar on my neck. That is what it will remind me of. And are we looking at the second to last page of the book? Yes? Line 2505, where Gawain responds to the Green Knight. Line 2505 in the Burton Raphael versions. And of course, are we looking at the second to last page? Yes? Page 183, yes? In the hardcover version. It's actually line 2429 in the hardcover version, this version, yes? Page 183. Are we all together? Yes or no? Line 2505 or line 2430, or really 2429. But the girdle, he went on, God bless you for this gift. Not for all its ore, its gold, will I own it with honor, nor its silks and streamers, and not for the sake of its wonderful workmanship or even its worth, but as a sign of my sin. A sad reminder that the frailty of his flesh is a man's biggest fault. How the touch of filth taints his tender frame. What is it that the Burton Raphael version says? My lord, says Gawain, lifting the belt, this band and the nick on my neck are one and the same. The nick on my neck, the cut on his neck, yes? The blame and the loss I suffered for the cowardice, the greed that came to my soul. Was it greed for sex or money, or was it greed for life? You can call it greed for life, yes? And he calls it cowardice as well. Is this the opposite of the knightly virtue of honor and courage? Of course.
It's only a momentary lapse. He should stop blaming himself.
But he should stop blaming himself. I think in those conditions, most of us would have been quaking in our boots. I wouldn't have reached that far. That's the truth. Okay. Most of us would have developed a terrible migraine headache on the way to the Green Knight's castle. Yes. Or an ulcer attack or something. He says, for the cowardice, the greed that came to my soul, this sign of bad faith is the mark of my sin. I'll wear it on my waist as long as I live. Yes, that's what, the green girdle. But he's not wearing it out of pride around his waist. He's wearing it out of shame. He says, for a man may hide an injury to his soul, but he'll never be rid of it. It's fastened forever. He'll never be rid of it. Now, who is he talking to? Is it still the Green Knight? No. He's talking to Arthur and the court. The king consoled him and all that court, and they laughed and resolved then and there that lords and ladies of Arthur's table would each wear a slanted belt around their waists woven of green. But are they really? They're celebrating Gawain's survival. But do they truly empathize with the terrible lesson he has learned? Or are they being more superficial? Remember, the end of the movie said the same thing, that we're constantly seeing the conflict between the frivolities of the life of the court and the hardships of the life of the true knight. Exactly. Okay. Now, are we then looking at a denouement and a closing to this narrative story, which lands us squarely in the moral debate, and it's a timeless debate, about what are not just the manly or the knightly virtues, but what are the virtues that will see us through for life? Yes or no? So, although this is a story that is rooted in essentially a male dominated culture, time, and place, is it also a story whose messages are absolutely relevant to both men and women in any time and place? Is it Gawain's fortitude, but also his cleverness? Yes, but also his prudence. And of course his charity. Because of course is courtesy the second cousin of charity? Yes, of course. Yes, another of the knightly virtues. Is it those qualities that have actually guaranteed his survival? Yes or no? Yes. But then the question is, are these also qualities that guarantee women their survival in an increasingly complex world? In other words, put it this way, ladies and gentlemen, maybe this might make sense to you too. As we're seeing women becoming more and more involved in the workplace, in politics, in government, yes, in the economy, etc., are we looking at women facing the challenges of a world that was once primarily all male? What would this say to you then, Alex? If women are increasingly, are you with us? Yeah, I want you to come and sit closer to me, okay? If we are looking at a world in which women are increasingly entering the province and the domains that were once the monopoly of men, politics, decision making, the economy, yes, the major high stress, once called the all male professions. If we are seeing women entering these fields more and more, even boxing, you've seen Muhammad Ali's daughter in boxing. This was a sport that was originally seen as, by definition, male. If women are entering these areas more and more, ladies, do they need to develop the same traditionally, in quotation marks, male virtues that we saw Gawain pursuing in his effort to be a true knight and a true man?
I think women have always had these virtues, they're just behind closed doors.
Explain more. Loudly. You are saying that women have always had these virtues, but when women exhibited these virtues was often in family life, behind closed doors, so to speak. But as we may have said last time, it's actually when women give up those cornerstone roles in the family that the family falls apart. Yes or no? As we're seeing today, increasing numbers of women, say, become addicted to street drugs in America in particular. Yes? And elsewhere, as these drugs become more and more cheap and available. Yes? Do we recognize then that where these women are falling down, their families will suffer? Why? Whether it was fair or not, whether it was justice or not, were women the cornerstones of the family and therefore of society?
It could be that no, in our modern days, women are just coming to the forefront. So these virtues are more showing within women, but in the older days, these are the virtues that women used to use to run the household. So it's not like they didn't really have the virtues. It's just that it was not shown to the world.
So that's what she means when she says the women were doing the same thing and meeting all kinds of challenges, but behind Does this then answer the question as to whether this book is a book rooted in a sexist culture and a book that is more relevant to males than to females?
No, not today.
Not today.
No.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Many people keep asking the question if Mrs. Clinton is going to be the first female president of America. Yes. And of course, Miss Clinton is the person who some years back, was it 16 years ago, she was accused of being the traditional woman standing by her man when she said in Congress and in her defense of her husband, "This is a Republican plot to destroy my husband." But the time proved her right. Okay, so even when she was, seeming like the old-fashioned lady, stand by your man, Dolly Parton and all these people, in actual fact, the time proved her right. Oops, sorry. And as a mother, was she also protecting her daughter, her teenage daughter, from gossip? Of course.
We could look at it too in the sense of Sir Gawain and the Queen, where he used his wife as a pawn.
Yes, that women are often pawns,
Right.
instruments of male power. Does Gawain refer to Samson and Delilah? Does he refer to Adam and Eve as well? Does he refer to a number of powerful archetypal male figures that he said were overcome and manipulated by women? And he says, in other words, I guess that if they were manipulated, they were such strong men, much more strong than I am. Yes? But if the bottom of page 181 in the hardcover book, yes? Okay, and it's we're looking at line 2418, something like that, or 2416, page 181 in the book, the hardcover book. He says, but no wonder if a fool like myself, should fall for a female and be wiped of his wits by womanly guile. It's the way of the world. Have we found it? The bottom of page 181 in the hardcover book, and it's line 24:8 or something like that in the other version. Is Gawain just trying to escape from moral responsibility? No. He's simply saying that, let's face it, stronger than myself, wiser, stronger men than myself have failed. Yes? Okay. It's line 24:15. Yes? 24:15 in other texts. What does it say? And the Green Knight says, oh, come home. Come and enjoy festivities with me and my wife. No, please. Gawain would like to say, kiss them all goodbye from a safe distance. Isn't that the truth? Especially the lady. Please, no more. Yes. What is it he says? And convey my wishes to your gracious wife and that other honored lady who cleverly tricked their knight. That is Morgana, the enchantress, Arthur's half-sister. Yes. Then he says, no wonder. There's nothing remarkable in their making a man foolish, in women winning men to sin. For Adam our father was deceived just so, and Solomon, Delilah was his death. And also Samson, Delilah was his death. And later David endured misery for Bathsheba's beauty. Women ruined them all. How wonderful if men could love them well, but never believe them. Is this the concept of the woman then as the seductress who is untrustworthy? We're looking at line 24:10 onwards. Yes?
That's the glass half empty thought. If it's the glass half full thought, the men were tempted by the women. So not
The men were tempted by the women,
yeah, the temptation of the women.
and the women needed to learn when to say no.
The men needed to learn when to say no.
Is that it? Yes or no?
Contain their own sexual urge, so at the end of the day, they're
But is this, let me ask a question then, ladies. Is this a way by which male culture has deposited the responsibility for sexuality and sexual choices
Manipulation.
on women?
Yeah.
Is this a responsibility that both men and women must face and accept?
It's common, it's just like men, they're passing the buck.
Passing the buck.
They're blaming it on someone else.
The woman made me do it.
Right.
Yes.
So,
Okay. And do we see that at the bottom of page 181, the hardcover version? But no wonder if a fool should fall for a female and be wiped of his wits by womanly guile. It's the way of the world. Adam fell for a woman, and Solomon for several. Solomon had several wives, yes. And as for Samson, Delilah was his downfall. And afterwards, David was bamboozled by Bathsheba and bore the grief. All wrecked and ruined by their wrongs. If only we could love our ladies without believing their lies.
really?
But I mean, the lies would be metaphor, not their lies on the literal.
The lies, the metaphoric lies, or the real lies. The question then is, are we looking at the voicing of a male tradition that gives women the responsibility for negative sexual choices and for using sexuality to what? Manipulate men. Sex as what? A form of power, as a weapon. But my question then is, let me put it this way. Do men play these same games?
Yeah.
Of course. Do men play these same games? Yes, yes. Okay, so is this then the voice of a male culture? Okay, thank you. Are we looking then at a powerful narrative poem that is not at all outdated or obsolete, but which has actually reminded us that there are some timeless ethics and virtues which are not only relevant to true manhood, but to true womanhood as well. And it may have been rooted in a sexist, male-dominated culture, but does it have a great deal of relevance to today, when women are in the majority of the workplace, of the workers, the workforce, in many cultures, but often
Positions of power.
but often are denied leadership roles. And where also women, often when given the choice, would rather choose the traditional roles of caring for their families and caring for those who are in their domain, the people they have to take care of, yes? Rather than competing, on unequal terms with men. It is why many women at certain points in their careers, in the workplace, etc., actually back off of certain kinds of competitions. Yes or no? Yeah. Now, is that a weakness in women, or is it yet another type of moral strength?
The moral strength is knowing when to say no.
It's a moral strength, it's knowing when to back off. Yeah? Okay. So, is the theme of choices?
That could be prudence too.
Is that also prudence? Thank you. Thank you, Diane. Is this a theme of choices as well? Yes or no? In other words, if women are brought into the world and conditioned from the time of their births with the concept of motherhood, responsibility for caretaking, not only for your own biological children, but for those we see as helpless and vulnerable in our care. Is it true then that those kinds of conditionings make women learn the virtue of prudence a lot earlier than males do? Is it a lack of prudence that makes Gawain volunteer? Or is it humility? Yes. Or maybe a certain amount of impulsiveness mixed with humility. He felt that if he was killed, this is inaction. It wouldn't be less of a loss than if Arthur was killed.
Could be the loyalty.
Loyalty as well. The all-male,
The value.
all-male loyalty and sense of
Value.
the value of the king. Yes.
And his worth compared to
Okay.
different.
Yes.
Also look at it as being prudent also because he made a wise decision. Because at the end of the day, he was doing it not as, he was doing it so that they could look up to him as, a good leader.
Was it part, in other words, perhaps, of his seizing an opportunity for perhaps training as a knight? But he had no idea how long this training period would take. Did he? Most time we don't know exactly.
Training to become a knight was a lifelong training.
The training towards becoming a true knight or a true man had to be a lifelong training. Thank you. Now if we look at, sorry,
But I imagine
you're saying there?
a green man on a green horse.
Let's face it, the green man on the green horse. Okay. Okay, folks, and do I want your first essay from you then, either on the day of our midterm exam, 2 weeks' time, or the day when we come back immediately afterwards? Will we also, don't turn it off yet, please. Will we also talk to each other about when is the best time for the midterm exam? Because I don't want anybody to have exams in one day. And if you're doing 5 courses, if we don't negotiate carefully, we might find ourselves with too many exams in one day. So remember, midterm exams take place in class time. But I want you to give me some feedback as you proceed with your other lecturers to let me know when would be a good time. They start on the 14th and they go through to the 23rd, don't they? Yes. Okay, here are our essay topics. This first essay should be between 3 and 5 pages long. I do not count words and I don't count pages. What do I do? Content. We're looking for quality, not quantity necessarily. Yes? And different people are able to do what? Say the same thing. You might take 10 words, next person might take 3 to say the same thing. Okay, here are our topics. Number 1, discuss the life lessons learned.
Is learnt a word?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Is learnt a word?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Learn to learn.
Learned, it has been learned. That's the past perfect.
I learned to ride a bike.
Learned is the past participle. You can use it as an adjective, yeah. Okay. Learn. Or you could say lessons learned as well. Either one will do here. From both Beowulf, the film, yes, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Okay. Now that one is obviously going to take more pages because are we looking at 2 books, yes? And are we looking at 2 books in both of these topics?
Say if I choose that one, if I
Oh,
don't
whatever,
put
can
in,
give me something to.
if I don't put in
Oh.
all of the life lessons
Clearly not.
that I am
Uh-uh.
teaching,
Are
is there a
we-
minimum or a max?
Are you listening to this lady, my friend?
Like, is there a minimum amount of life lessons that I could?
Are you listening, folks? What are we saying? At the beginning, would your thesis have to say, there are many life lessons to be learned from these two works, but for this reader, the major ones are as follows. Because if not, it will go on forever, won't it? Yes. Okay. Then, number 2, discuss the major structures and their connected themes, yes, in the above works, in the two works, Gawain and, yeah, okay. And then, of course, is it logical for us to get something on manhood? Yes. Okay. And let us have a look at that one. Can we use the Kipling poem as well as an anchor for our discussion? Is that why I brought it for you today? Yes or no? Of course. Do we wish to go over the Kipling poem and look at all the manly virtues that Kipling talks about? Yes? Okay. Here we are, my friend. Let's have a look at this one. Okay. Every time graduation rolls around in the high schools, yes? Particularly in the same-sex grammar schools, private schools, where, they still have these in different places where it's only boys. Yes? Does the theme of manhood come up in the graduation speeches every year? Of course it does. Yes, of course it does. Okay.
But nowadays, the man, mere man, could be it's applicable in both male and female.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be just because it says man.
No, thank you.
Because
But
we
this
are man.
Mhm.
That is what we are.
Yeah, but some people don't realize that. Discuss the theme of manhood and its relevance, to spell it out then, to womanhood in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Okay, and can we have another one which really overlaps on this one? Discuss the theme of virtue and survival in Beowulf and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And can you hyphenate Sir Gawain and the Green Knight? Not hyphenate, capitalize it like that. Yes or no?
SGGK.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
When you say discuss, you meaning like an expository?
Yes, but does the best expository essay have to start with a thesis paragraph? Of course. Now, if you wish help establishing your thesis paragraph, you must get it to me by this weekend, Sunday evening. I'm not reading the whole essay draft, obviously. What do I want from you? Your thesis paragraph, which must establish what your argumentative position will be. Do I have to agree with every word you say? Of course not. But must you make yourself clear? Yes or no? And must you make it clear that your point of view is rooted in and supported by a clear knowledge of the text? Yes or no? Of course. Okay. Any questions? When is it due? It's due on the day of our exam, whenever that is, or after the break. The midterm break goes on till.
Can we do it after? 'Cause
It's your choice.
yeah.
Some people, it depends what else is happening, would like to get it out of their lives before. But would it be due the first time we meet? Are you all listening to me? after the midterm break?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes or no? Okay. But
Minimum of 5 pages.
we're looking at basically, I would say it's 4 to 5 pages. Pretty much so, unless you're a very concise writer, which some people are. Okay? And if you go to the easy writer, you will find notes on how to set up literature essays. But, hello, my friends, are you listening? Are we going to get a migraine headache over footnotes and references and all of that? No. But what's the bottom line on quotations? If you're quoting from a text, you must quote it exactly. Otherwise, paraphrase. And what's my other warning, my friends? We have a few more minutes. Do not plagiarize. Don't, in fact, take my foolish advice and do not go to internet to read critical analyses of these books until you have written and hammered out your own thesis paragraph, which is your own point of view. My experience is that internet has this way of brainwashing and overwhelming, So try and nail down your own point of view first. And if you want any responses from me, send it to me by Sunday night. Thank you very much. Okay.